My front porch turned into a crime scene in under 10 seconds. Two guys in cheap security vests had my son pinned against the railing barking, "Give us the safe code now," while Diane Whitaker, the Homeowners Association president, stood at the bottom step with a clipboard and that calm, poisonous smile. And the moment I heard her say, "Keep going. This is an HOA operation," I realized they weren't here to scare me, they were here to take something. My name's Ethan Cole, and I moved into Maple Ridge Estates because it looked like the kind of place where nothing ever happens. Cul-de-sacs, trimmed hedges, a little lake that makes everyone feel like they're living in a postcard. I wanted quiet, especially for my kid Jake, who's 17, and thinks every weird moment in life should be filmed just in case. Maple Ridge has a homeowners association, of course. They all do. I expected the usual stuff: lawn-length trash cans, no boats visible from the street, that kind of suburban religion. What I didn't expect was Diane Whitaker treating the HOA like her personal government. I met her on day 3. She showed up like she'd been waiting behind a tree, crisp blouse hair, not a strand out of place, clipboard tucked to her chest like a badge. "Welcome to Maple Ridge," she said. Two bright eyes doing a quick scan of my driveway like she was pricing a used car. Then she leaned in a little and lowered her voice. "I'll need to confirm a few compliance items," she said, like we were discussing termites, "especially your storage." My storage was a locked shed near the side of the house. Not visible from the street, not bothering anybody. Just mine. I told her I'd read the bylaws, and I'd follow them, but I wasn't giving random tours of my property to strangers with clipboards. Diane's smile didn't move, only her eyes did. "It's not random," she said. "It's an emergency compliance review." That phrase, emergency compliance review, should have sounded ridiculous. It did for about half a second. But she delivered it like it was a legal term carved into stone, like I was the weird one for not knowing it. I asked what the emergency was. She flipped a page on her clipboard, tapped a line with her pen. "Community safety," she said. "Potential hazardous items. We've had concerns." Concerns? From who? She didn't say. She never says. That's how people like Diane operate. Everything is concerns and reports, and the community feels, which is just a fancy way of saying, "I want my way." I told her no again. Calm, direct, not rude. I've learned that in places like Maple Ridge, the second you raise your voice, you become the story. Diane clicked her pen. "Then you'll be hearing from enforcement," she said. "And Ethan, just so you're aware, in a true emergency, the Homeowners Association can override certain private restrictions." I stared at her. "Override my front door?" She tilted her head like I was slow. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," she said, and walked back to her Mercedes like she'd already won. The next morning I got a notice taped to my door. Not mailed, not slid politely under a mat. Taped, in big bold letters, "Notice of violation." It listed things that made no sense: obstruction, refusal of inspection, community risk. There was even a line that said, "Subject to immediate action," like my shed was an active volcano. I went online, pulled the bylaws, read them twice. I'm not a guy who guesses with paperwork, and the more I read, the more obvious it was Diane was stretching every rule until it snapped. Then it got louder. 2 SUVs started appearing at the end of our street, parked like they were watching a suspect. One was Diane's red Mercedes. The other was a beat-up Explorer with a roof light that looked like it came from a Halloween store. The first time I saw it, I laughed a little. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. Like, who does that? Grace Miller, my neighbor across the way, caught me looking and gave me this tiny shrug like, "Yeah, welcome." She didn't say much then, just watched Diane's car like it was a storm cloud. By the third day, it wasn't just cars. It was people. Diane's security guys started walking the sidewalk in front of my house, taking photos, pointing at my fence, whispering into radios. They acted like they were cops, but they didn't move like cops. Too much swagger, not enough certainty. Jake noticed immediately. He kept his phone in his hand every time he stepped outside. "Dad," he said, "they're trying to bait you." I know I told him. Just don't talk to them. Don't give them anything. And that's when Diane escalated from petty to dangerous. It happened on a Saturday. Jake and I were unloading groceries. Nothing dramatic, just normal life. And suddenly those 2 security guys were on my porch like they'd been invited. One of them shouting, "HOA enforcement, we have an order." An order. From who? Diane's printer. I stepped between them and my son. "Get off my property," I said. My voice was steady, but my heart was punching my ribs. "Right now." One of them smirked. "We have to secure the premises," he said, reaching toward Jake like he was grabbing a shopping cart. "Kid needs to come with us until we confirm." "Until we confirm what?" "The code to my shed. The contents. Whatever story Diane had built in her head." Jake flinched when the guy's hand touched his arm. It wasn't hard, but it was wrong. And that's the part people like Diane don't understand. You don't need bruises for something to be a line. Diane stood at the bottom of the steps, perfectly composed clipboard, out like this was a neighborhood meeting. "Ethan," she called up, "stop interfering. You're escalating." I felt my face get hot. Not rage, yet something colder. That protective kind of anger that makes your vision narrow. "Diane," I said, "tell them to let go of my son." She didn't even look at Jake. She looked at me. "If you complied, none of this would be necessary," she said. "We have concerns about weapons and hazardous storage. The community has a right to be safe." Jake's eyes flicked to mine. He didn't say anything, but I could see it fear confusion, that horrible question teenagers never want to ask their parents out loud. "Are we in trouble?" I got Jake behind me inside the doorway, and I shut the door without slamming it. My hands were shaking when I locked it, which made me angrier because I don't shake. Not from a suburban Karen with a clipboard. That night, Jake barely ate. He kept replaying the video on his phone, scrubbing back and forth like he could find the moment it stopped being real. "They can't do that, right?" he asked. "No," I said, "they can't. But when you're staring at your kid's pale face under a kitchen light, the can't doesn't feel like a guarantee. It feels like a wish." I'm going to be honest. There was a moment right then where I thought about giving Diane what she wanted. Not because I believed she had a right to it, but because I wanted the street to stop watching us. I wanted Jake to walk to the mailbox without feeling hunted. I wanted sleep. I stood in my garage later staring at that locked shed thinking, maybe I should just let her get it over with, make the circus leave town. And then I pictured Diane's face if I did that little satisfied tilt of her head. The story she'd tell the neighbors about how she handled the dangerous new guy. And I realized compliance wouldn't end it. It would feed it. The next morning, Grace Miller knocked on my door. No smile, no small talk, just her phone in her hand. "I didn't want to get involved," she said, "but you need to see this." She showed me an email thread from the HOA listserv. Diane had written it. Paragraphs of fake professionalism sprinkled with words like risk and liability, but then one line that made my stomach drop. She basically said she needed access to locked storage to reduce community exposure and increase leverage for compliance. Leverage. That's what this was. Not safety, not rules, leverage. I thanked Grace, and she hesitated like she wanted to say more. Then she finally did. "She's done this before," she said, "just not this far." I spent the next 2 days doing the least dramatic thing possible: paperwork. I called the county clerk's office and got connected to a woman named Maria Alvarez who sounded tired of everyone's nonsense, which meant I liked her immediately. I read her the codes Diane had quoted in the violation notice. Maria paused, then said, "Sir, those references don't match anything on our end." So she made them up. "I can't say intent," Maria said, careful, "but I can say they're not valid citations." Then I hired a surveyor, Tom Jenkins, to verify my property line because Diane had started claiming parts of my side yard were common space. Tom came out, did his measurements, shook his head. "Your boundary is clear," he said. "She's either mistaken or playing games." By the time Diane's security returned, I had a timeline. Photos, video, email screenshots, bylaw sections highlighted, a clean folder with dates and names, no ranting, no drama, just facts. And I waited. Because people like Diane can't help themselves. If you give them enough rope, they don't just hang themselves, they decorate the whole street with it. The final confrontation came on another Saturday early. I was making coffee when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel, then voices outside, sharp, confident, performative. I opened the front door, and there they were again. The 2 security guys halfway up my steps. Diane at the bottom, centered like she was about to cut a ribbon. She looked up and said, "Bring the minor out. We need to confirm compliance." "Minor," she said, like Jake was evidence. Jake stepped behind me in the hallway, phone already recording. My jaw tightened. "You're not touching him," I said. One of the guys puffed his chest. "You can't obstruct an enforcement action," he said, and he actually reached toward my doorframe like he was going to push past me. That was the moment I stopped treating it like a neighborhood dispute. "Step back," I said. "Quiet, flat, now." Diane's smile twitched. "Ethan, don't make this worse," she said. "HOA authority supersedes." "No," I cut in. "It doesn't." I held up my folder just enough for her to see the tabs. "I have your emails," I said. "I have your fake citations. I have your security putting hands on my son. And I have a surveyor report showing you're lying about common areas." Her eyes flicked fast. For the first time she looked uncertain, not scared, not guilty, just annoyed that reality had shown up without an invitation. I hit speakerphone and called the county office back. Maria had told me exactly who to ask for if this got physical again. The call connected, and I didn't have to say much. I just described what was happening, gave an address, and said, "They're attempting to remove my child under false authority." The security guy froze. Diane's posture changed slightly, like someone had turned down her volume. Within minutes, an actual patrol car rolled into the cul-de-sac. Real uniform, real calm, real authority that doesn't need a costume. The officer listened while I handed over the folder. He didn't react much, professionals don't, but I watched his eyes move when he saw Diane's citations, then the email line about leverage, then the video still of a hand gripping Jake's arm. Diane tried to speak, but it came out messy. "Officer, this is an HOA matter," she said. "We're protecting the community." The officer looked at her like she'd handed him a coupon. "Ma'am," he said, "you're not law enforcement." Diane's face hardened. "He's non-compliant," she snapped. "He's a risk." The officer didn't even blink. "And you directed private security to detain a minor on private property," he said. "That's not an HOA issue, that's something else." One of the security guys took a slow step backward. The other suddenly found the sky fascinating. Their swagger melted like cheap plastic in sunlight. Diane clutched her clipboard, tighter knuckles whitening like it was going to save her. But clipboards don't outrank consequences. The officer asked for names, IDs, licenses. The security guys hesitated, which told me everything. Diane's voice got higher, sharper, and for a second she sounded exactly like what she was, a person who's used to getting her way because nobody wants to deal with her. Then she said the worst possible thing. "This neighborhood belongs to the HOA, she snapped. "He doesn't get to say no." The officer turned his head slightly, like he was making sure he heard her correctly. "Actually, he said he does." A few phone calls later, the tone shifted from neighborhood dispute to ongoing abuse of authority. Diane's clipboard slipped from her hands and hit the concrete with a dull slap. She stared at it like it betrayed her. And right there on my front steps, with my son behind me and a real officer between us and her little fantasy government, Diane Whitaker finally understood something she'd refused to learn. Power isn't what you pretend to have. It's what holds up when you try to take someone's kid. Lesson learned: never let a bully with paperwork convince you they're above the law.